Patreon. And we're live whenever you want to take us live, Boyle.
Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, hack. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ready Room Podcast, Cowboy Time, brought to you by Authentic Media. This is episode 5. Today's date is 30 July 2025. It is a Wednesday, and we are here with you now. We've got me in the lead for today, here with my clown shoes. In Dash 2, we've got Lenny with his big brain in his big car. And in Dash 3, we got Gravy with his always changing facial hair. And I must say, it's looking like more red and robust than normal, Gravy. I think
for winter.
You shaved off all the gray, and then now it's come back younger and better than ever.
That's right.
Yeah. On base, we've got Roger. Absent, though, is Nuke, though. So sadly, we're down 1 on base, and hopefully Roger can keep up with us today. We'll find out. You can find us on our comm plan on Primary, at Patreon, Apple, and Spotify, and on Aux. You can find us on YouTube at Authentic Media. All of our episodes are up right now, or on X at Ready Room Cowboy Time. Okay, moving forward on this one, we got a tight timeline for today, so we're just going to dive right into the question of the day. Question of the day is for Gravy. Gravy, what is the PL?
I love this question for the former Harrier guy, right? PL-15, the one missile that they would never waste on the AB-8B Harrier. All you Harrier guys just joking. I want you to know that. Red-headed stepchild of the fleet. Love it. Favorite airplane in the whole wide world. Okay, PL-15, also known as the Thunderbolt. I think in China, that's what they call it, potentially. At least that's what all the unclassified sources say. So cruising the internet, this is all unclassified stuff, conglomeration of GPTs, Wikipedia, and some other unclassified sources, so nothing classified coming out here. So this is a long-range, beyond visual range, air-to-air missile, and it is a very long-range missile. It is the one thing that everyone has been trying to catch up to since about 2016 to 2018-ish, when it started to be fielded, when we started getting indications and warnings of it slightly before that, and then seeing it in test, and seeing some long-range shots, which go out to kilometers estimated. And I'm not quite sure exactly how far we've seen him shoot, but 300 kilometers, that's 190 nautical miles. That is a lot. Wow. So, yeah, and for everybody that's ever had to do any type of BVR, that's beyond visual range defense tactics, you're kind of going, here we go. Okay, so what's it? For Pulse Spy? I don't know. Anyway, there's my English for the day. Not a lot of sleep last night. It's a dual pulse solid rocket motor. So I think this thing's cool. Pretty interesting way to use older technology for solid state rockets, right? So big boost, gets up high, and they can fly a long way. And then another pulse of rocket motor for in-game maneuvering. So very maneuverable in the in-game. Can get up around Mach 4 plus Mach 5-ish, and the Seeker's active of some type. There's some unclassified speculation that they have a small AESA on there as well, but I can't speak to that really. Mid-course guidance, probably data link, probably inertial, somewhere in between, and it launches off J20s, J16s, J10s, J11Bs, and probably J35 question mark. I just didn't see that in any unclassified sources. I'm just guessing there. And what are they doing with these things? They're trying to shoot down HAVA, so HVAA, high value. What's the A in the A? Someone help me out here. Help me out there.
High value aviation asset.
There you go. Aviation assets. I thought it'd be cooler than aviation assets. But they're trying to shoot down the HAVA, right? So think tankers, think AWACS, think those types of things that are going to really smoke the dope of the blue fighters. So pretty cool missile. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about its European competitor, the Meteor, later.
All right. Well, great. Hey, thanks, Gravy. That was fantastic. Lenny, anything to add to the question of the day?
No. Gravy's very thorough there. I will just add that I am not driving. I am parked. I'm being safe. Not podcasting with my iPad up on the steering wheel. Totally unrelated to the question of the day.
Pilot.
Just to explain the setup here.
As a reminder, everyone's a safety officer. As we've all been taught.
Did either of you go to safety school? I need to know this right now. Did either of you go?
I did not.
Well,
did not have
commander safety. Commander safety.
Yeah, commander safety school, which we all went to, right?
That doesn't count. Commander safety school. No, I'm talking about real safety school. Okay, we can continue the podcast with you since no one here is a school-trained aviation safety officer. Okay, carry on. Let's go.
That's right. Okay, well, we're going to come up to our first topic, which is something that we haven't brought up and it kind of got lost in the noise of all the other things that were happening around the world in early May. So we're going to talk a little bit later about the Ukrainian and Israeli drone strikes deep into Russia. And we've talked about aspects of that, but there's some other pieces we want to pick apart. So that was happening. Then we had the B-2 strike that happened, which we talked about heavily on our first episode. But one thing that's gotten kind of lost in this noise was this Indian-Pakistani kind of 4-day war that occurred. And then really what matters to us here in the Ready Room is this 1 day or kind of 1 hour, 1+30 vol that happened between Pakistan and India. So this is kind of the first modern day large scale air battle that has happened in a long, long time. You probably peel back. Maybe there were that many aircraft airborne at some point in the Korean War or some other kind of conflict, but really in a long, long time have we had up to over 100 aircraft involved in an aerial battle. And then I'm going to take a page from Lenny's book where instead of just shooting from the hip, writing down some notes to tee up the first question. And for those who aren't familiar, in early May 2025, so really the 6th to the 10th, escalating tensions over a deadly terrorist attack in Indian-administered Kashmir triggered the Indians' Operation Sindoor, which was a targeted series of missile and drone strikes by India into Pakistan. So the Indians stayed on their side of the border, but were launching into Pakistan. And the conflict surged across the skies for 4 days until peace was declared, or a ceasefire rather, on May the 10th. And it's really the largest air battle in a long time, as I was describing, with Pakistan on the 7th with this big air battle that happened, claiming shooting down several Indian aircraft, including Rafael, MiG-29, Su-30 MKIs, Mirage 2000s, and a couple of drones. While India countered initially that, like, no, none of that happened, and that they had achieved all of their military objectives over the next couple of days. So, first question is, Lenny, I'm just going to throw it right to you. From your knowledge and from your reading of this, and this is all unclassified, which makes it really hard to try and pick this thing apart, you know, in your mind, what was the confirmed scale and outcome of this aerial combat? You know, in your mind, how many jets were actually shot down? What were some of the tactics that were involved here?
Yeah, it's hard to find that out, right? I read through several sources there. Most recently, looking up Al Jazeera, reporting about up to 6 Indian aircraft shot down in the combination that you said, 3 Rafales and then 1 Su-30. So, but it's hard for us to know, right? I'm just looking at these second and third hand news agency reports, and it's interesting. Like you said, they were each on their own side of the border, large scale attack. And, historically, I've always thought of India, and confirmed this just through some recent research, as kind of the conventional superior force to Pakistan, right? And so, as we learn more about this, that's what I'd like to know. It's like, man, like Pakistan must have upped their game if they were able to kind of shoot down this, hybridized modern force of aircraft coming in from India. But yeah, 6 is what I heard, and it sounded like there was an Indian captain that spoke out. But yes, a lot of misinformation on both sides claiming victory, but it does look like a lot of Indian aircraft shot down.
Yeah, Gravy, what's your assessment?
Similar, right? So all the reporting says 6 coming from Pakistan, and the litany you guys described. India came back and said, well, none, and then it came back again. It's like, well, 1-ish, maybe 3 to 4, right? So it's the standard campaign of people not wanting to claim true numbers, which, no fighter pilot, regardless of nationality, has ever lied about a shoot down, a kill, or anything, truly. So I believe all numbers from everybody. But about 125 jets, man, that's a lot, right? And we've been in LFEs that size, up north in Alaska or at the Nellis tactical training ranges, those types of massive forces. And I just think it's absolutely amazing, uncommon, to say the least, that 2 opposing nations would be able to mass forces at the same time with gas, everyone lined up, ready to go, master arm switches on, everyone going, we talk about, hey, what are the odds of that ever actually truly happening, outside of a training range in the United States of America? Well, guess what? There's the odds right there. And they were all, proxy militaries defending their homeland, didn't even cross the border with these long-range missiles. So I think the whole thing's very impressive and also great for us to study, because I mean, they basically executed all the tactics that we grew up with. I mean, they were taught those tactics, they executed those tactics to varying degrees, and so I find the whole thing fascinating.
Yeah, Lenny brought up a great point about India. We have typically thought about in the U.S. is probably the more advanced conventional force. They've got a lot of European equipment, a lot of UK, French. They fly Rafales. Certainly, they have MiG-29 exports and Su-30 exports as well. But they shoot French Meteors, which Gravy had brought up. They've got their own AWACS. They've got S-400s. They have a robust air defense system and kind of command and control. And their tactics are, the latest and greatest for their country. On the Pakistani side, which I don't think a lot of people had, maybe they knew it was in the back of their head, but they've been getting a lot of equipment, gear, training, and advice from China. So the Pakistanis are flying J-10CEs, which are made by Chengdu Corporation, a Chinese aircraft corporation. Chinese call it the Vigorous Dragon, which I think is a badass name for a aircraft. We call it the Firebrand on the NATO side, which isn't bad either. And then the Chinese and the Pakistani Air Force have cooperated and co-developed the JF-17. So those are their primary fighters. They got HQ-9 surface-to-air missile, which is another kind of big bad system. And they had AWACS, the Saab 200. So think of it like a big Learjet, kind of like a wedge tail, if you can imagine in your mind, that kind of blade antenna on the top of the aircraft. And there was a great debrief. Who knows? There's a lot of misinformation, but from the Pakistani side, from their air marshal, about here's how it went down when it did. And on the Pakistani side, I think it was like 45 aircraft. On the Indian side, 75 aircraft. Nobody crossed the border, but they're both taking long-range shots at one another. And he talks about, we're pumping, we were grinding, we were executing our these are quotes from him as he's describing it. Gravy, what are your thoughts about, like, as you said, like getting all those aircraft up in the air? They probably didn't all like send out flight schedules to one another. I can't imagine. It started probably more aircraft are going up, and now each country is sending more and more up. What are your thoughts on kind of the coordination and the logistics that it takes to kind of do that kind of thing?
Oh, this is all stuff that we practice, and this is the whole old tail, right? The logistical tail that goes all the way back to the mom and pop shop, making hubcaps that support the aircraft. So it's a robust ability to get aircraft airborne in a timely fashion. And of course, that works its way up the chain. You get on the aircraft, gets into a maintenance culture. We have smooth running aircraft that are flying a lot with trained pilots that know their aircraft and know their tactics. And then we start doing drills on launching as fast as you can and doing alerts. And then, it's something as easy as forgetting to pull the pins on the missiles to arm the missiles if you don't do everything in the right order. And of course, I don't know anybody that's ever flown with a pin in an AIM-9 ever once, right? No close personal friends of mine have ever seen little flags flapping in the breeze because they didn't get their missiles armed. So it just takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of effort to get that many aircraft airborne at the same time, online, ready to go. And I think you're right. So I watched all the YouTube videos, but I haven't really seen a whole lot of like how the beginnings of the thing started. So I can't really speak to that. But I will say this. So I've always been concerned. I've flown with the Indians, did a big exercise with them off Goa in like 2005-06 in an exercise. Flew with their Sea Harriers. We were flying our Avi-8Bs. It was a great time. Learned a lot about aviators. Doesn't matter what nationality you're from. We all speak the same language and we all act the same. We sound the same. Like it was a pretty interesting exchange there, but very professional, very good. But we've always been concerned at the number of various types of airplanes that they have in their inventory from multiple different countries with different logistical and maintenance schema that are going to be hard to keep up with. I mean, for anybody to keep up with. And we know this just being in the Marine Corps between Hornets and Harriers, and at the time, Prowlers and then F-35s, and how F-35 kind of consolidated three different logistical trails into one single, logistical effort, which in a lot of ways streamlined things and made it easier for us with other challenges to work through. But I've always been concerned about that with India. And I don't know if this points to that lesson learned, but it's one of the things that I believe might be validated with this exchange.
Yeah. Gravy, what
Two
are your
thoughts,
thoughts?
if I can jump in there.
Yeah.
I think diversity can be good in that, it can also be negative, right? Maybe you have too many things you have to manage, but also if there's something wrong with the logistics chain on one, do you have a little bit more resilient force or robust force, given the fact that you have diversity and something is affecting one of those platforms, some of the others can pick up that slack. And to the point of massing those forces certainly helps when the two nations are right next to each other and there's kind of like Kashmir, the main disputed region, right? So excuse me, I think it might be a little more unrealistic for other nations to do that same kind of massing if they aren't those neighbors and that kind of here's our one disputed region for the conflict. So, but yeah, and the other thing that I'll say is kind of the Indian pilots talking about losses, at least acknowledging losses, but not in the numbers, really kind of finger pointing to their leadership about too many handcuffs on, that they think they could have done more. They were instructed not to do X, Y, or Z. Like, hey, we think we were inside our territory, but we still got shot down. I mean, we could have done some more stuff against surface to air defenses, et cetera. So again, hopefully we'll learn more about exactly what effects, took those aircraft out. Were they air-to-air missiles? Were they surface-to-air missiles? Because that's what the Indian pilots seem to be blaming right now.
Didn't I see an open source reporting some PL-15s on the ground, like broken up? I don't know if they're associated with shoot downs. I'm not quite sure, but I thought I remember seeing something about that. But I totally agree, and that's why I say, like, I've never seen that many aircraft in the sky except all launching from United States terra firma. So yeah, I mean, where else in the world can this type of thing happen if it's not the United States launching aircraft off of 4, 5, 6 carriers heading into an engagement? And I don't know where that could happen.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You're exactly right, Gravy. There were reports of broken up PL-15s on the ground inside of India, so clearly those were shot from Pakistani aircraft. How do you do that with long-range aircraft? RUSI, the Royal Uniform Studies Institute in London, did some good analysis on this. For if you're going to shoot one long range, you've got to have offboard queuing, which is coming from an AWACS or space-based layer. Then it heads down range, and then it's getting in-flight updates from some other source. Was that happening? Totally unknown right now. And then were the Indians unaware that those types of things were available to the Pakistanis? Again, unknown what it was. Were they air-to-air missiles or were they surface-to-air missiles, like you had said, Lenny? What do you guys think, just to kind of wrap this one? There's so many unknowns, and you kind of have to what if almost from the very beginning. All we know is like two large forces in the air were airborne at the same time, taking shots at one another, and then they all landed, minus the ones that were shot down. What are your feelings on the, what are the Chinese taking out of this? And Gravy, I'll kind of throw it at you.
Yeah. So I'd love to get behind a door with some of all of our sensors and our ability to see things and get like the real brief on what happened. And so that'd be one thing I'd like to see, like the actual truth as we know it from hard data. I'd also like to know the working of the internal pieces of the airplane, like the handoff from the AESA radar, the in-flight update to the missile, to the uncertainty volume, to potential, full engagement. I'd like to see that because, I don't look at this like some of the pundits do of like, oh, the Rafael got smoked by the J-10. That's until we know technically how those things worked, we can't make those judgments because it could be pilot error. It could be 20 different factors on why a Rafael might have gotten shot down versus a J-10C. Was it a pure nose-to-nose, missile-to-missile engagement? Was anyone even aware? So there's just a lot of stuff that I'd really like to know and understand before I'm going to really start pulling lessons learned out of it. But I guarantee you, with the tensions between China and India, the Chinese are very interested, and they have probably already turned this one inside out and, know as much as there is to know about it.
Lenny, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, it depends, right? Finding a broken up shape on the ground, did that shape, was that the shape of the missile that actually consummated the air-to-air kill or not, right? Until we can kind of piece that together and we know, who shot down what, it's kind of hard to take away those lessons learned. But as I open with, I do think that however it's happened, Pakistan appears to have upped their conventional force game, which should give everyone a little bit of stop for pause there on how they did that.
Yeah, and it's been in open source that, the Chinese were providing a lot of technical and tactical assistance throughout the entire 4-day period. They didn't just go hands off, that they were actively, providing Pakistan with the latest and greatest on how to employ their weapon systems. I think
Great sales technique.
Yep. Yep. The Indians, though, I think it started on the night of kind of 6th, 7th May. The 7th is when this big air battle happened. And then you had the 8th, 9th, and a little bit of the 10th. And no more Indian aircraft were shot down. So maybe we could pull from that, a quick learning curve on the side of the Indian Air Force. And during those next few days, they successfully conducted the strikes on their military targets. Was it all the military targets they were going after? Certainly they say so. But that they were able to, with their weapons and kind of newly formed tactics, were able to have their weapons penetrate the Pakistani air defense efforts and strike many targets successfully. Grave, it looks like you got some thoughts there. I see that big saw brain working.
Yeah, it never stops. That's why I don't sleep at night anymore. That and a 2-year-old. So one of the things that we always talk about is it's the ability to use our Udaloop, right? Our observe, orient, decide, act Udaloop. So basically be able to sense what's going on in the battlefield, make sense of it, and then do something about it and be a learning organization, right? In going to the extreme of sometimes maybe having to stand down and stop operations, take some operational risk, and then realign the force from the things that you've learned. And it was probably a pretty emotional, learning moment for these guys. So I think that's an interesting point that you just brought up, underscores the needs of a learning organization. And so that's pretty good, so kudos to them. But yeah, I'd really like to know some truth data other than just some, internet, YouTube comments, ours included.
Yeah, that's right. Which are the most valid? I just have to say for the record.
Yeah, those are the ones I believe.
Lenny, any final thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I'll agree. Steep learning curve if that's indeed what happened, and or if indeed leadership said like, "Whoa, we need to loose the chains and let you guys hit more stuff." So I'll look forward to learning more along with you guys in the coming week.
All right. Well, we'll put that one to bed, but I was eager to talk about that one. And that was something just inside baseball for everybody that we had talked about before we started the podcast. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many topics out there and so many things were happening in the world that this one, I think, has gotten kind of lost, but is well worth revisiting. And I certainly hope, Gravy, to your point, that, other folks in the U.S. military are going behind closed doors and really picking apart and analyzing this from, from all the intelligence sources that are available out there.
Well, rest assured, they're probably in the Air Force.
That's right. But they'll share, right?
Yeah, sure.
They'll share with everybody.
Yeah. No, they won't put this behind a program.
Yeah. Okay, next topic I wanted to hit. Although in a previous episode we talked about base defense with the drone strikes, almost not simultaneously, but Ukraine did their Operation Spider, where they sent on trucks, low-cost, one-way attack drones to be able to take out strategic bombing assets. Deep inside of Russia at their home bases, which the Russians, I'm sure, thought, hey, this is sanctuary. We're 2,000 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. There's no way they could touch us here. And then almost, I think a week later, Mossad agents infiltrated their way into Iran and did similar efforts to be able to bring down some of the Iranian IADs before Israeli and then U.S. strikes were able to be able to penetrate. And I just kind of wanted to talk about what has this done shifting our, thinking on military strikes, military power, and this new kind of asymmetric means of being able to do deep and, frankly, strategic striking power with this very low cost, very small kind of asset. Lenny, we'll start with you, man.
Yeah, gosh, in light of the first topic, you kind of take a look at topic 2 and the loss of 6 of those aircraft and how expensive they are and new. The Rafale's pretty new. I mean, I remember seeing them on the French aircraft carrier when I did an overnight on the Charles de Gaulle and got to check out the carrier version of it, right? And certainly newer than the legacy Baby Hornets I was flying at the time. So you talk about the costs involved in that fighter. And then, how visible potentially fighters are, like going across the border there, India, Pakistan, or not going across the border and still getting shot down in your own territory, right? And then you talk about the success of these strikes with these smaller drones, infiltrating systems, potentially some soft aspects there as well. And how many aircraft were destroyed in Russia, right? The surface air defenses that were destroyed in Iran. But, it makes me wonder a little bit, as I think we've talked about before, about the future of fighters and manned aviation and all this stuff. If you can find some really good effects at a much cheaper solution, to accomplish the mission in a not as visible manner.
Gravy, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think this is where things go from, quickly from tactical to strategic level impacts. When we spend our lives tactical, right? We're talking about, merging, a section, 2v4, 2v6, 4v4, like whatever it is. We're talking hyper tactical engagements. And then we went out and we went and did things like go to WTI and become weapons school instructors. You kind of step out there a little bit and you start to feel like you're operational. Well, you're not. You're still highly tactical. And then, you step out to maybe, war, command and staff and then war college, and you really start to understand that like the Marine Corps is an operational force, right? Like we employ MEFs, Marine Expeditionary Forces. We're operational. We're at the operational level of war in the Marine Corps. We win battles. That's what we do. Formerly, I guess. Sorry for putting the mantle back on, fellas. Realize I'm retired. And then, when you step up to the strategic level, now you're getting to like big war winning type capabilities. Well, what I find interesting about this type of technology is that very quickly you take a tactical technology, but you have strategic effects because you flip the cost curve on the enemy. So, you're not doing $100 million fighter jets with a couple of slammers, going down range against, a couple of unmanned assets. The bang for the buck there is very low bang for a lot of buck, right? Like you spend a lot of money to make that happen. And for the cost of that, you're fielding 100,000 drones. You're stuffing them into a Connex box that costs like $8,000 that you can get at the wharf. You're trucking in, you're opening the roof up, and this swarm of autonomous robots is going and wreaking havoc. And that is a strategic effect, right? Because now you flip the cost curve. You've now hit a strategic level target inside 2,000 kilometers inside of a country, or you've brought down surface-to-air missiles that are protecting strategic assets like nuclear facilities. And you've done that with an extremely cheap weapon that you can replenish quickly. I think this thing, jumps from tactical to strategic real fast. I don't want to say it's like the bee's knees and the end-all be-all, but it's something that we really gotta understand this technology and its full implications, and maybe use it if it suits us. And I'm sure people are working on that. Not me. I'm working on other kind of robots. But but it's the same idea, right? If you cannot keep this thing, cheap enough for the defense industrial base to keep up with it and produce it in numbers to beat someone as large as a peer like China, Russia, whoever, name your peer competitor, and it doesn't matter, because you're going to lose in the end. You're going to be priced out of the war. And, who wants to win a war, but at the cost of, massive, decades long debt? That's not winning. That's just enslavement in another fashion. So I find this, there's just so many levels to this discussion beyond tactical. I wanted to bring that up as well. So sorry for filibustering you there, Lenny. Apologies.
No, that's awesome. And I think both of you guys, kind of brought up, it's deep in another country's territory. So, how has it changed our concept now of strategic depth? I'm sure the Russians thought like, wow, we got loads, that is one of their assets. That in winter, are their two greatest assets,
right?
For defense of the homeland. And I'm sure Iran thought, man, we've got a whole nother country between us and Israel. And yes, they've talked about doing strikes, but in order to do that, we know like they're going to have to roll back IAD. So that will, your normal type of thinking is that will involve some sort of either big cruise missile strike or aircraft. And that'll give us tipper that these other kind of follow-on strikes are happening. But that's not how it went down. And that whole concept of strategic depth now goes out the window, right?
Operational reach, right? And you're talking about a robot with a 20-minute battery with the operational reach that's like 2,000 kilometers plus 20 minutes. I mean, that's amazing. That is an amazing strategic asset for something so small, so cheap, so light.
Yeah.
We always talk, combined arms in the Marine Corps too. So I'll kind of contradict myself and say, obviously, if, the only threat they had to worry about was drones on trucks, crossing the border, they could probably spend all their security dollars on screening for drones on trucks coming across the
Yep.
border, right? So if you don't have that deep aviation threat, the manned fighter threat, the bomber threat, so certainly having all these tools either in your toolkit to attack, or certainly being aware that they're out there now as we look at defense, like we talked about last episode, that combined arms, and now having to defend against those multiple different types of attack certainly complicates what the enemy could do to you.
And then, Boyle, we're gonna have to take like a whole episode just to talk about fighter jet robots. You're gonna get me and Lenny spooled up so quick. We're probably gonna have to sit mulligan the whole episode though.
Yeah.
With all the stuff we know about. but it's the exact same idea. Okay, so fleet up the idea of the small cheap robot and now fleet it up to a manned unmanned team, which everyone's like, that's ridiculous. But actually, no, you can bring a lot to bear with that team, with the right technologies and right command and control systems. So big fan. However, I really wanted, like, what Lenny's right on, right? Like, multiple pathways to success. This is not the end all be all, right? This is one of many tools, and without the others, it is not effective. So yay, Ukraine had F-16s, because that was part of the package, and then they can also rope-a-dope and send in drones.
Yeah. We look at, on the news, it's very exciting to see the truck or aircraft carrier, as Lenny pointed out a couple
New
episodes
aircraft
ago.
carrier.
New aircraft carrier. As it's launching out the drones, it has this strategic effect as it takes out strategic bombers on the Russian side. And we see those explosions. And then it's almost like, okay, now we're done thinking about it. What do you think the follow-on cost implications were on the Russians after that? Gravy.
Lenny, no. I need to think about it, man. I got to think through the fog here. I don't know.
Gosh, I can't help but think that, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of people who might not be around anymore because of that. I mean, you read these things about like all these CEOs falling off buildings, right, and stuff, right? It's crazy. It is,
and if
so
if they don't jump off well the first time, they jump off again. Yeah.
Right, the second time. So, I mean, It's crazy to think about, right? And if that's the civilian side and the justice going on in that country, then potentially what's happening to military viewed as failures when you lose a significant portion of your bomber fleet, strategic bomber fleet, right, nonetheless. So yeah, I think that the churn is not over in Russia on this. Nothing.
Yeah, these wounds are getting pretty deep country to country. I do not see. I'd love to be wrong, but resolution seems hard.
Yeah. And Lenny, I'm just chuckling at the, Russian model of human resource management in the Russian military.
Well, and to be fair, Ukraine's isn't that much far off, right?
Yeah. Or Iran.
Birds
what
of
are those? What happened to
or
those?
Iran,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened to those commanders?
I don't know. All those dudes should retire to become contractors and, just speak in the unclassified world and throw spears. That's what they should do.
Yeah, I highly recommend that.
Yeah. Still probably doesn't save you from a long fall out of a building, though.
Or lead poisoning.
Yeah, but we're going to put it in the contract, first floor only. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, there's a lot going on. The last thing I'll bring up with that, I just think about, what were the follow-on repercussions? Yes, there was probably some leadership changes, but then what does the defense industry do, or what does the political will do now? Are they now devoting untold energy towards installation counter UAS? Are they not? Are they now moving their aircraft around every day in order to keep it dynamic? There's a lot of different things you could do, but I just think about what would be the follow-on actions if there were a drone hit on a U.S. aircraft inside of CONUS. And let's just say it was just some hobbyist or protester, and they just flew one, into an F-16 in Tucson or something like that, right? Like, what would be the follow-on actions after that? Other than probably a leadership change, right? A lot nicer than other countries. But, what would then spool up across the whole defense industry, or maybe nothing?
And that's a multi-layered question that we could dive into probably for an hour. Well, because in the Marine Corps, commanders are responsible for the security of their units, right? Everybody has a force protection plan, and we learned that the hard way in a lot of ways. And that's why when you go onto a base in country, every unit's surrounded by concertina wire, is separating units from each other, and you're like, why are you protecting me from those guys over there? But that's because the mentality is that force protection for every unit. And then stepping out to the air station and stepping out to the theater, right? Which would then, encompass borders and then road security and then airborne security, blah, 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 right? So like there's a lot of layers to the thing. But what I would hate to see happen is like, a top down, multi-bajillion dollar, mini golden dome or silver dome or platinum dome or whatever you want to call it, but like another dome that's just gonna drain the treasury in pursuit of nirvana where it doesn't exist, versus finding, the more efficient, places to stop these things from either coming in the country or, spoiling their command and control system or whatever it is, whatever the indications in the mornings are. I don't know. But I just think there's a lot of layers to it and a lot of ways to attack it that don't have to be a, $20 billion top down, DoD program of record.
Yeah. Yep. Lenny, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if I were the Russians there, step one, that was the main deep threat that I thought I would have, right? You're screening for those kinds of trucks. You're screening for similar type things. You're going to look for similar type vehicles, right? Now, certainly, okay, can it be scaled down, scaled up, right? You're just not going to be letting anything suspicious in across the border. You're going to be searching anything in and around. You're going to have more of a security presence in that respect. Now, I mean, in the scenario you outlined, there's probably a very easy step one is you're not flying drones recreationally. There's probably a grounding period while folks could up their game a little bit in terms of that defense. This is as simple as hanging as many of your aircraft as possible, moving the rest around. We talked depending on the size and scale, things as simple as nets or some acquisitions of venues there for some of the systems that we discussed last time would certainly be possible. But yeah, you would probably say, how real of a threat is this? Is this one rogue actor, or is this something that we think is going to be coordinated in the future? And how quickly or draconian do we have to act on that? And is it no drones, no fly zones, no drone zones that extend very far out from civilian airports, military airports, all these kinds of things? It would all have to depend, as we say so many times on the show.
Oh yeah. But I think, the point being that, a drone strike, however it's delivered, all the things we talked about, changes in maybe mindset of strategic depth, vulnerabilities. We've talked last episode about counter UAS aspects, but if there's a successful one, it goes beyond, the cost goes beyond just that asset that was attacked. There's energy, money, there's going to be a whole lot of dynamic action that is taking place post-attack that's imposed by a very, very cheap asset, that's readily available.
Absolutely.
All right. Knowing that our beloved Dash 2 Lenny's got to pitch out an RTB early, I'm going to drop the third topic. We'll save that for another time. And Lenny, I'm going to turn it to you for this week in aviation history.
Wow, yeah. So this was an interesting one. I was looking at this day in aviation. There were a lot of interesting things to pick from, but this one jumped out at me. And this day in 1935, 30 July, Lieutenant Frank Peak Akers of the Navy took off from Naval Air Station San Diego. He was in an especially equipped OJ-2 biplane in a hood, so cockpit covered, and he was taking off trying to find the carrier just with electronic devices on board the airplane. So he does this in a biplane, flies 150 miles offshore on the coast of California, and he's able to find and land aboard the carrier. And then he gets the Distinguished Flying Cross for doing it, probably because it was such a scary mission to do. So, I mean, you think about that. Again, it's like we talked about automated carrier landings, almost 70 years old, right? We talk about, navigating on instruments and those kinds of things. Like 1935, we were finding the carrier 100 miles off the coast, with very simple electronic systems. So, 90 years ago today, they were already able to do that. And, there's the origins of the instrument hood as well, probably. They had figured that one out 90 plus years ago, too.
That
Damn.
just reinforces, I think, one of our common theme or common conclusions that we've had on this podcast is that aviators today are weak with all their fancy gear and shit like that. Like that
Yeah,
dude
think
get
about,
in a biplane.
do you think he had a raft? Do you think he had a parachute? Do you think he had shark repellent and his little fishing hook in his seat tent, Or do you think it's like, hey man,
He didn't do an
good luck?
ORM worksheet before he walked. Yeah.
Hopefully we see again. We have no clue what the weather is out there. Go find the carrier. Good luck. Hopefully we see you back here. We get word from the carrier in a few days that you made it, wild. Just the cojones you needed to have back then to do some of this stuff.
If you land on the carrier, send a homing pigeon back to let us know you made it okay.
They're out of homing pigeon range, 150 miles. That might be,
Well, you needed
Yeah.
two. One pigeon sits on top of the other pigeon,
That's
and it
right.
gets
Then
close, and
launches
then the
it.
other one launches out. Yeah.
Yeah. They're I wonder, did they intentionally make that hood sweaty? Do you guys remember that first time you put on that hood and that flight? All you can see is your instruments. You're doing this, trying to look down your nose. You're just trying to accidentally see outside the window to see if the blue side is up. Without your instructor noticing in the back. Man, just sweat.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, it looks pretty wild. I mean, nothing says that he didn't peek under the hood like I would have done, though. But I'll trust his honor and integrity since it was 1935. But I might have been peeking around the bottom of that thing looking for the boat.
Maybe. And then input from base, homing pigeons, it turns out, can fly over 1,000 miles to return home.
There it is.
Let's take that.
So that was like a tenth of the range of the pigeon.
Wow.
Pigeon could have gone back and forth a couple times.
Why do we even need drones then? Why don't we just send pigeons?
I was going to say. Yeah. Well, let's do the old biological.
The new deep strike
biological robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
That's the kind of idea we could sell. I mean, there's someone in the Pentagon who wants to know that idea, Lenny, and give you money for it. That I guarantee.
No, you're the Aggie, right? You went to Texas A&M and did all this kind of stuff. You could start a pigeon farm and figure out how to raise these things, right?
Yeah. I'm sure it goes swimmingly.
Yeah, doesn't need GPS, low logistic footprint, low carbon. Hey man, I'm here nothing but wind.
We're gonna have to find Marines that can write on very small fonts.
We're probably going to get in trouble here because I just talked about expending animals against bombers. So I'll retract it as a terrible idea. Say that I do love animals.
What if the pigeon volunteers though for this mission?
Yeah, then I think we're okay. We just got to figure out how they can raise their hand.
Okay,
man.
As we're wrapping up, hot takes. Okay, I got a hot take here. This is a well-debated, contentious issue inside of naval aviation. The Piddle Pack, there were two versions that we flew with. One, affectionately called the cheese sandwich and the Jello mold. The cheese sandwich, for those who don't know, it was the Piddle Pack. This is the bag that you pee in when you're in the jet, and it had this. Yeah, that's right. It had a sponge, and so it had this dry sponge. So you pee, and the sponge would absorb or try to absorb all of the urine that you shoved into this bag. Whereas the Jello mold had this powder that I'm sure was non-toxic and totally fine for your member that you were putting into this bag. And then it would turn your urine into this gelatin mass in there. And so my hot take is the superior Piddle Pack of these two different types was the Jello mold. That was the superior one.
Man, so many memories are flooding back.
What about
you
got to bring in the AMXD now too, right? Now you have your little bag.
Yeah, new technology. You got to grow. Boyle.
You gotta always have to have 3 coas, right? And so I would agree though that they were all throwaway coas in the case of the Piss, but I would agree that the gelatin was the superior for me. When I started out, there was only a few sorties there with the sandwich one, and then the Jello one came online, and I was so I dehydrate myself. I do all the crazy things to not even have to use it in flight. And then you'd have these other guys who are just like, oh yeah, I filled up 3. And it's like, I can't believe that you're doing this often and still flying around on this mission. Like nothing's going on, and how you're still doing that, I don't know. But yeah, I was a fan of the Jello, and then, less chance of leakage, etc. on the disposal process.
Yep.
Well, you had to have the right closure technique, and
Also
and
true.
I remember having to school a few people in Flight E. So, Lenny, I'm going to get you in some more trouble. When you got out of your jet on the flight deck, what happened to that pedal pack? I was just curious. I forgot where it went.
Mulligan. They were always disposed of in accordance with procedures.
That's right. That's exactly
Exactly like how you said that. I got to go gelatin too. Started
Oh.
in the old days with the old sponge there, and that was awkward and weird. Sorry, that was just awkward and weird. And then you figure out the appropriate way to dispose of it. And then, every now and then you'd find some awful human, some awful pilot who wasn't raised right. He'd be getting out of the aircraft, and as he's handing his bags down to his maintainer, his plane captain that's helping him would pull out the pedal pack solo and hand it down, and the Marine would take it because it's Marine and doing his job, and the officer enlisted relationship, and then you take said young officer and just have their ass. On what in the world are you doing? Go get that, pay that Marine back a case of beer, whatever it is, but you never hand a bare pedal pack out of your airplane to anybody.
No.
Right? Clean up after yourself, right? Yeah, but that was funny because there's all these little unspoken rules about it. There's technique has to be applied in the aircraft based on the particular airframe. Thinking of F-35 here. Glad to be alive. Let's just say that. And
another proper way of disposing of him is putting him in the Exo's G-suit pocket,
1,000%.
which I found was a preferred technique.
Yeah. Well, and then you got to work out from there. Sometimes the Exo's beloved, so sometimes it's the OPSO, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the Exo. Sometimes it's that one pilot that you're just not quite sure about. You just it has a life of its own.
It has a life of its own. All right. We got to wrap up here, so Dash 2 can depart. Any reattacks, gentlemen, from today's episode?
No AMX.
No, I mean, the carrier pigeon one was great. That was, I learned something today, and I'll think of a new idea as long as it can be environmentally and animal friendly. Like Gravy
Base
said.
feels the need to come in with a reattack, guys.
Yeah.
Base is coming.
Base,
Reattack.
Base comes in. I got to share it with you guys.
Ready.
Lieutenant Colonel William Henry Rankin. Name ring any bells? I have to share this for today in aviation history. July 26th, so last week, 1959, Lieutenant Colonel William Henry Rankin, World War II and Korean fighter pilot, was flying an F-8U, old enough they were still F-8Us, not F-8 Crusaders, on his way to Beaufort, when over 47,000 feet over a Thunderhead cumulonimbus, engine failure, aux power handle breaks off in his hand. I couldn't get a restart. Jet's going out of control. He has no pressure suit. The outside air temp is estimated to have been minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit.
Woo.
He has to eject. Immediate frostbite decompression caused his eyes, nose, and mouth to bleed. He fortunately had emergency oxygen. His parachute did not open for 5 minutes, leading to him being a human piñata in this Thunderhead. And then, even worse, it did open prematurely, well above the 10,000 feet. He's being pelted by hailstones. He's spinning to the point he's vomiting uncontrollably, and says he had to hold his breath to not be drowned by the rain. At which point a lightning bolt came so close to his parachute, it lit his entire parachute up. He thought he had died and gone to the other side. It fused all the zippers on his G-suit and the moving parts of his sidearm. He landed in a forest 40 minutes after ejecting from the aircraft, riding down the entire thunderstorm, and then a la Pete Mitchell in Top Gun Maverick had to hike to a road to go find somebody to give him a lift to the hospital, where he was treated for frostbite, welts, bruises, and decompression, but he made a complete return to flight status and then passed away July 6th, 2009.
Wow.
Man.
Wow.
That-
What a story.
That is terrifying. I'm gonna have
I felt the
nightmares about
three
that
of you
tonight.
had to have that
Yeah.
included.
Yep.
Wow.
Thank you, Base. Thank you, Base. Always
yeah.
value added. Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. Dash 2's got to peel off, and it's good. The XO has figured out that I'm putting piddle packs in his G suit, and I hear him coming down the hall. So, time to get back to work.
Yeah, let's
Sounds
do it.
good.
Back to work, all this.